Hello everyone, this is Arda speaking, and it is my first video slides that is being recorded. I hope everything will turn out to be fine for all of us. Now, we'll be talking about William Faulkner today, and I titled this presentation by adding the man from the South, because reading William Faulkner is basically reading about the South. And having said that, let's talk about the South. Now, the South historically refers to a set of states located in the south and southeastern, basically southeastern part of the United States. And these states are Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and of course Texas, Virginia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. On the right-hand side, you see Selma's March in 1965, if I'm not mistaken. It is basically African Americans protest. And on the left, you see the Lone Star Republic's flag. Once Texas was a republic, Lone Star Republic, but it was long time ago. So here is the map of the United States. So you see the southern states, Texas in down south, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Arkansas. Have I said Oklahoma? I'm not sure. So this is basically what the South is like geographically. Now, what about the characteristics of the South? Now, you see in the photo on the right, you see cotton pickers, and they are African Americans, slaves, in other words. Now, on the left-hand side, you see slavery and cotton production. Year by year, starting in 1790. So you see between 1790 to 1860, almost roughly 100 years, the number of slaves increased tremendously. So did the cotton production. So white domination of blacks characterized Southern politics and economics from the 17th century up until the Second World War. And some of the profitable crops were tobacco, rice, sugarcane, and cotton, of course, which were grown extensively, making this region agriculturally at least very rich. But we have to also, in parentheses, mention that although the southern states were agriculturally rich, northern states were manufacturing and establishing factories and employing technology to turn these agricultural products into some set of products. Economically, the antebellum and cotton-oriented South, in that sense, needed the British textile industry for its market. And the growing political economic power of the industrialized and industrializing North would soon affect the progress of the South tremendously. So we will have, right before the Civil War, we will have a tremendously rich and technologically advanced North, whereas, boastful and psychologically so much full of themselves southern states, which lacked technology and which had a great deal of agricultural products. So the white-dominated South's continuing insistence on the inferiority and subordination of blacks resulted in mass migration of the blacks to the north in the upcoming years. So the Civil War between the North and the South happened between 1861 to 1865. Brought immense destruction of much of the South, which made the loser, the southern states, in conflict. In many areas, the cropland was ruined, livestock lost, railroads, the available ones, destroyed, and billions of dollars in slave-related investments wiped out. So this was a very difficult moment or period for southern states, which recovered slowly from this destruction, although much of the South continued to rely largely and mainly on one crop economy. So either a region harvested cotton, tobacco, or rice. And they still needed, although they were not slaves anymore, they needed free men of black origins. So Faulkner, William Faulkner, who lived between 1897 to 1962, lived in this soil, lived in this region. And he came from an old Southern family, grew up in Oxford, Mississippi. He joined the armies, and then he worked for a New York bookstore and a New Orleans newspaper. As I always say, as we learned from our professors at Hacettepe University in the past, majority of American writers once at least in their lifetime worked for bookstores or newspapers. So he followed the same tradition as well. Except for some short trips to Europe and Asia and a few brief stays in Hollywood as a scriptwriter, Faulkner worked on his novels and short stories on a farm in Oxford. So he remained as a man of the South throughout his career. So what about his characters? Now, Faulkner, as a novelist, created many characters, and these characters were typical of the historical growth and subsequent decadence of the South. So his characters were, from that soil. They were Southern people. That was visible with their accents, with their values, with their beliefs, and so on. So each story and each novel by Faulkner contributes to the construction of the South as a whole. And he created this imaginary land he called Yoknapatawpha, which we believe, and which many critics believe, is in fact where he lived in his lifetime, Lafayette County. Faulkner's themes basically can be reduced to one single entity, which is the decay of the Old South. So Faulkner experienced the decay of the Old South against the newly flourishing North. And this decay is represented by many families and ruthless and brash newcomers are also visible in his novels. And not only the theme, but also the technique of delivering this theme incorporates the distortion of time through the use of the inner monologue, what we call stream of consciousness. And The Sound and the Fury is a major novel he wrote in 1929, is an example to this fine adjustment, fine balance between the theme and technique. Now, The Sound and the Fury is set in Jefferson, Mississippi. The novel centers on the Compson family, who are farmers in the South, who are also, yes, they were farmers, but they did not work on the fields because slaves did the job. So they were aristocratic Southern family members, and they struggle, and the novel expresses that they struggle for their honor, for their reputation. And in the course of over the course of the 30 years, this narration by Faulkner exemplifies how this family went from riches to rags. And many of the family members died tragically. And this story is told by or narrated by the minds of several characters. One of these characters is Benjamin. Benji, I think you see him here, the white guy, the older white guy here. So Benji is an intellectually disabled person. He has a great sense of sense. He senses everything, although he cannot talk about what he feels, what he senses, but he senses what happens to his brothers and sisters. For instance, he senses the suicide and death of his brother Quentin. So especially his narration makes use of an eloquent, a great use of stream of consciousness. So this is an example to Benjy's narrative style. Now let's have a look at this. So as you can see here, his friends, well, family members and friends and so on, they make him drink alcohol here. So because he doesn't really know, because he's disabled, mentally disturbed, he doesn't really know what's happening. So he says, it was hot inside me. That is to say, he's drinking that alcohol and so on. So later on, he talks about how tipsy he becomes. So this kind of narration brings success to the novel because there are multiple layers of not only telling the story, but understanding the story and what is happening in the storyline. Faulkner's novel Sanctuary, 1931, is about the degeneration of Temple Drake, a young girl from a distinguished Southern family. Now, this theme, this sub-theme of a young girl from a Southern family, you know, being or becoming degenerate, becomes a motif for many upcoming Southern writers, among whom Tennessee Williams, the playwright, is an important one. In Requiem for a Nun, 1951, this novel is written partly as a drama and it follows this previous novel by him, Sanctuary. Faulkner in this novel continues um, his narration by focusing on the courtroom trial of a Negro woman who had once been a party, a friend to Temple Drake's debauchery. Light in August 1932, prejudice is shown to be most destructive when it is internalized. That can be the motto of this novel. Joe Christmas, the main character, believes, though there is no proof of it, that one of his parents was a Negro, which created a big problem in the South, white man being a Negro ancestor. In Absalom, 1936, the theme of racial prejudice is brought up again, in which a young man is rejected by his father and brother because of his mixed blood. And Intruder in the Dust, which is Faulkner's most outspoken moral evaluation of the relationship and the problems between Negroes and whites, again, stories of families are narrated. So, Faulkner died after he fell off a horse. He died of a coronary occlusion. And the New York Times cited his critics in his obituary and stated in a very harsh and, for me, in a very unjust manner, Mr. Faulkner's writings showed an obsession with murder, rape, incest, suicide, greed, and general depravity that did not exist anywhere but the author's mind. Well, this, I think, is really unjust and not true. But 43 years later, in his review of J. Parini's book, One Matchless Time, A Life of William Faulkner, in 2004, the novel writer J.M. Coetzee defined Faulkner not only as the most radical innovator in the annals of American fiction, but a writer to whom the avant-garde of Europe and Latin America would go to school. So William Faulkner, if you have time, try to read at least selections from his novels to understand his eloquent and artsy style while he narrates what slaves do on a daily basis, picking up cottons, doing things, and talking with each other, and so on. We can also say that Faulkner follows, local color writing fashion, and he is really attached to the South. So reading Faulkner is basically reading and understanding the South in the second part of the 19th century. There are also some important facts about Faulkner you might like. Before Faulkner became famous, he was working for the University of Mississippi, but he was fired because he was reading too much. Also, in his last name, the letter U is added there afterwards. His real last name was, so to speak, Faulkner. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1949, but did not actually receive it until the following year, because the committee, the Nobel Prize committee, could not really decide among the notable candidates who were Ernest Hemingway, Albert Camus, and John Steinbeck, among many others. Many of his books were turned into movies, and well, that was what William Faulkner was like. So you just, if you are interested in his work and his life, you can just go and do some further readings. And as I've mentioned before, try to read at least some parts of his books, especially the introductions, the beginnings, to get a sense of what it was like to be a Southern writer and what it was like to be in the down South in the second half of the 19th century. So, guys, I hope you are enjoying your time. I know it's a difficult time, but we are going to make it. So, hope to see you soon. Love you. Bye-bye.